Welcome to the Equity Teacher Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rachael Mahmood. In this podcast, we'll dive into the stories, the voices, and the expertise of incredible teacher leaders who are making a difference through the equity work they do in their classrooms and their communities. Welcome back to another episode of Equity Teacher Leader. I am super excited for our guest today, Hex Ram. I met her at Freeport at the Institute Day when I had the honor of presenting. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Hex, and let's get into this podcast.
I've been at Freeport Middle School for 2 years. I teach social studies there, and I've had like this huge focus on kind of like civics and geography. And at the Institute Day, it was so fun because I actually got to see you and part of your presentation a little bit. So we had our little exchange back and forth there, which I thought was super awesome.
Yes, I forgot to mention that. And also, unfortunately, or fortunately, I got to do 2 sessions. So I missed your session on supporting queer youth. And I heard your session was absolutely wonderful, which gave me the idea to invite you on the podcast. And really, our first podcast exploring how to support students of all genders in our classrooms. So I'm super excited to dig deep into this. And this is a safe space. And I have a lot of questions because I am certainly not the expert at supporting all genders in my classroom, though I love all my students, no matter what gender they choose or are assigned. I just absolutely want to be there to support them. And I know so many equity teacher leaders out there feel the same way. And we're excited to learn from you. Now, when I put your name up here, when we post this episode here, we're going to see your honorific, which actually Hex just taught me what an honorific is. Mine is doctor. Yours is mix. So MX period. Tell us a little bit about that and that, and the name Hex, is that the name that you were assigned at birth, or tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so Hex is not my assigned name. I have a dead name, which is kind of the name that I was born with. I no longer go by it. And I actually knew that I wasn't necessarily in love with my first name that I got, and I changed my name to Hex socially when I was in college. I landed on it. It actually started as like a reference to a video game that my friends just started calling me online, and I was like, oh, I actually really like that. And with kind of like my religion and my background, like hexes are also something that can like provide a lot of like protection and a lot of strength. And I was like, this is exactly like the person I want to be. Like I want to be someone that's able to like protect my people and protect my space. So I kept the name, but with MX, it came along with my identity. So there are a lot of different ways that you can refer to teachers, right? I'm sure you're probably familiar with like Mrs., Miss, Mr. But as someone who doesn't really fit into that gender binary of either going with Miss or Mr., there's not a whole lot of options. But one that came up when I was doing research throughout my teaching career, like as I was starting, was mix, which is this kind of gender neutral way. It actually started as like almost with the feminist movement to kind of reject like the misses, like identifying yourself as marriage, and it'd just be like, this is the person I am, and that's where I'm at. And so it's been like become a lot larger usage in the LGBTQ community, especially for like gender non-conforming people who don't really identify either way. So I use mix.
I love it. And it sounds so beautiful. Mix, Hex, Ram. I love it.
Right? It
Absolutely.
flows.
It does flow. It does flow. You have exactly the name that you are meant to have right there. So tell us a little bit about that transition and just coming into your identity. I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to think about like who you are as a person, right? Because you've always been that person. But I knew when I was in middle school that I wasn't necessarily fitting in with the rest of the girls in my class. And I couldn't like put a finger to it. I just always felt like different. Even when I was in high school, I just felt like deeply uncomfortable wearing like the dresses and doing the girl stuff. And I like didn't have the language for it. But actually, a friend of mine in high school came out as trans, and he kind of talked to me about it. And as he was talking, I remember one day thinking like, oh, that would be so cool if I didn't have to like be a girl either. Like that would be so cool. And then it took until college that I was like, oh wait, I don't have to be. Like I can go this and like be my own person and become my own like whoever I am. So in college, I ended up coming out as gender fluid, which is an identity that says, sometimes you're feminine leaning, sometimes you're masculine leaning. And a lot of my peers in college, I went to Illinois Wesleyan, were super supportive of me. And I was able to kind of like build this environment where I was able to explore my identity. I won't say it was easy. I did unfortunately experience like a lot of like pushback from people, including
Mm,
unfortunately from some of my family members.
mm.
But since then, I've been out as Hex, and I have been out fully for almost 7 years now. And not everyone has been able to have that kind of like smooth transition that I have, but I'd like to think that I've been like very grateful that all the bumps in the road that I've had like people to back me up for them.
That's great. And now you're a person that's giving back, right? Backing up
Yeah.
students who may be, questioning their identity, transitioning through their identities, and arriving at their authentic selves. I think that that's beautiful. It's a way to give back to your students. So you used a lot of words, and I'm going to
Yeah.
be honest. Again, I already said I am not the expert when it comes to gender identity. I heard so many new vocabulary words for
Mhm.
me. Maybe like just break down some of these words for those of
Yeah.
us well-intentioned teachers. We want to support, students of all genders, but we just may not be as familiar with the terminology. Give us a 100 level course so we can better support our students and use the correct terms.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, like the most important terms to start out with, is kind of like your sex versus your gender. So your sex is going to be your parts. That's like your oftentimes your assigned gender right at birth. Because when you come out, that's how we decide, like, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl for our gender announcements.
Say parts, you're
Yeah.
talking about your reproductive organs.
Yes,
Your
absolutely. So it
reproductive
goes by
organs are your,
reproductive.
okay.
100%. Thank you for asking.
Mhm.
That was such a good question. And then gender is like your presentations, either more masculine or feminine. So someone can, for example, like myself right now, have one like sex part, but be identifying as a different gender. Or for many people, they identify the same way as their parts. So a someone who would be considered female is also identifying as female.
So I think about this like, and tell me if I'm way off base here, but like your reproductive organs that you have at birth, right? And that's your sex. And then some like your brain is also like
Mhm,
telling you what your gender is. So
mhm,
sometimes that's like completely aligned, right? Like
mhm.
everything just feels like a flow. So like when things are aligned, you don't even notice them, right?
Yeah, it's
Because
like
everything
perfect
is
and easy.
just
Yeah.
like, right? And so
Mhm.
you don't question anything because your brain is just in line with your body. And so therefore nothing feels uncomfortable, nothing you have to wonder about or question. Everything just is something that you don't even think about.
Yeah,
But
it
then
clicks.
sometimes your gender in your brain is
Mhm,
telling you something different than your body. And then
mhm,
I've noticed with the transgender people I've talked to or
mhm,
gender questioning people, when their brain is telling them something different than their body, they feel uncomfortable
mhm.
all the time. And they
Yeah.
notice it all the time and they're aware of it all the time, even if they try to ignore it, even if they
Mhm.
try to pretend it's not there and they feel that. And I don't know what that feels like because I
Yeah.
don't have that, right? Like mine just line up the way
Mhm,
that, they do, and somebody else lines up differently. And so, is that kind of where we're getting
yeah.
into the idea of gender versus sex?
Mhm. Yeah, that's perfect. And there's actually a word for what you described, and I think you described it very well. It's called dysphoria.
Mm,
And it comes from the Greek, but essentially it's like just the idea that your body is not matching like who you perceive yourself to be and who you would feel most comfortable being. So dysphoria is exactly that. It is really hard sometimes on certain days, like even for me, to be like, I don't feel like I can get out of bed because I'm really concerned that someone is going to perceive me in a way that I am not matching. So people who are trans might be experiencing this dysphoria and they will feel like totally lost out in the winds. Like there's higher levels of depression, there's higher levels of anxiety that go along with this because it's exactly like you said, the brain is telling us something and our body isn't matching. And it's creating that kind of like discrepancy and a lot of those problems that are going to follow us throughout our daily lives and every single interaction we have through the whole day, even in the interactions just with ourselves.
And I think we see that even like with young kids, right? Because there's a lot of stories out there of young kids like scratching at their body parts,
Mhm.
at their reproductive organs, like wanting to eliminate them or change them, or like just being really uncomfortable and vocalizing that from a very young age. So you know
Mhm.
something is going on, right? It's not like something that they just made up when they got to middle school or
Right.
high school and it got trendy or something. It's
Mhm.
something that you are legitimately feeling.
Oh, yeah. My second grade teacher actually called my parents in for a parent-teacher conference once because she was worried about me because I had been refusing to hang out with the girls and talk to the girls because I was like, I don't want to do any of that. Like, I don't feel like that. And I felt like an outsider with them. And she was like, you know, she's just making all these comments, and we're just really concerned that she's struggling with her social group, and
Mhm.
suggested that like I needed to connect more with my peers, and that was the problem. So then as I got older and I was still having these issues, my parents were still like trying to set me up with other people in the class to be like, oh, like they're nice, why don't you be friends with them? But the problem wasn't that I didn't want to be friends with them. The problem was that I just felt so disconnected from that social group and what it meant. And so it's exactly that. Like there are kids that it doesn't always manifest right away as being like, oh, I'm trans. It manifests in all these other ways first.
Yeah, and I think transgender youth have one of the highest suicide rates. Is that
Hmm.
correct? I
They
think I've
do,
heard that
yeah.
before. Yes. And so it's
Hmm.
very important that they are able to process all these emotions and feelings in safe environments, because we
Hmm.
don't want to lose any of our youth because they didn't feel comfortable in their own bodies, right?
Right, yeah.
That's incredibly sad. So we used a lot of words, some more words, right? And
Yeah.
so tell us about some more words. So when everything lines up, our, assigned sex at birth and our gender lines up, like me, what am I?
That is going to be cisgendered, which
Mhm.
is literally like Latin for like on the same side. So you're identifying the same as your gender assigned at birth, and then being transgendered, right? Trans is on that other side. So that's going to be identifying differently. So that's someone who identifies as male when they were born female, or perhaps vice versa, or someone like myself who is just identifying differently from that assigned gender that I was given at birth.
So transgender means anything different,
Mhm.
not specifically identifying as the opposite gender.
Right. It's more of like we'd call it an umbrella term.
Mm.
So some people use rather than like trans, they use something called like gender non-conforming, which just means that you don't conform with the gender, but that's also like under the umbrella. So you have like trans, and then someone who is gender non-conforming might be someone who like just doesn't fit in with those gender roles as much as someone who is like cisgendered where things are clicking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. One time I did have a parent tell me my child cannot call somebody by the pronouns
Hmm.
that like different pronouns than their assigned sex, right?
Right.
And they said, that's something we don't believe in our religion, and that's something my son can't do. And I am all about respecting people's religions.
Hmm.
I'm all about inclusivity, diversity. That's everybody, right? And so I understand, and I don't want any kid to break their religious beliefs on my behalf. But one of the things that I shared with the parent is I actually don't know
Hmm.
anyone's assigned sex at birth, our assigned gender at birth. I don't know. When kids come to me in my classroom, I only know what their parents check the box for and
Exactly.
what they
Yeah.
tell me. I don't know any of my colleagues.
Hmm.
I don't know any of like the principals, the secretaries, the janitor. I don't know anybody's
Hmm.
assigned gender at birth because I wasn't there when they were born, right? And I don't know what reproductive organs they have underneath
Hmm.
their clothes. I just, know what they tell me their gender is or what I see. So, yeah,
I
no,
think you handled that very well. It's a really
yeah,
hard concept to have.
You know what? And honestly, the parent handled it really well too. I think in that moment, the parent realized, like, I'm trying to work with you, absolutely. And I definitely
Right.
respect all your religious beliefs. But at the same time, I don't know how to
Hmm.
navigate this space. And so the parent was great too. And the parent was great
Good.
all year long. And I think we came to a great understanding. And I love those parents. I love those students,
Hmm.
and I have a great relationship with that family. I was thinking about like the idea of somebody might be transgender, but you don't see it.
Oh, right. So that would be more about like passing as a
Mm,
term. So passing is a term that like, oh, you pass as. It's something that you could use to talk about lots of things, right? Like maybe someone looks a certain way and it's easy to assume that they're a part of that dominant group. And if that's the desired like thing, then that would be passing. So someone like a trans man who is someone who identifies as male looks visibly masculine, and if you were walking by him on the street, you address him using masculine terms in your brain, or like literally, then he is passing, right? Whereas someone who perhaps like identifies as male, but you wouldn't use male terms, you wouldn't automatically do that for him, that would be someone who is considered not passing.
mm.
And for many trans people, for many transgender people, the desire is to pass because it's to identify and have people perceive you immediately as, who you are in that moment and who you are as a person.
Yeah, and we've used this term passing a lot, I think, with race, right?
Hmm.
Passing for a different race than you are. Oftentimes, people want to pass for something that's going to give them less resistance in
Exactly.
society. Also, people with disabilities can pass as people that don't have disabilities if those
Hmm.
disabilities are hidden. People without money or financial privilege can pass as somebody that has money if they wear the right clothes or have the right designer labels on. Usually people want to pass in order to reduce the oppression that they
Hmm.
face. All right, now we got all those terms all figured out. Now I want to get into some strategies, right? One thing I love about this podcast is we're always going to give you some strategies that you can employ right away to help support students to advocate for more equitable treatment of them and more equitable experiences in school. So, why don't you share a couple strategies with us? How can we better support students of all genders, especially those that identify as queer or transgender in our classrooms?
So I'd say the biggest thing is to just be visible every time in every space that you are. Having even just like a sticker on your laptop or on the door that's a rainbow or one of the safe space stickers that your schools might have is going to let students know that this is a safe space for them. And that visibility is huge. I think is going to be the biggest thing that you can just start right away for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, like, it doesn't have to be this loud thing. Cause I think sometimes
Mhm.
teachers are nervous, right? There's school districts that don't support this conversation, right? There's school
Mhm.
districts that don't support our LGBTQ students' identities. And so it's hard to be very vocal sometimes because we're all worried about losing our jobs and not being supported as teachers, even if in our hearts we believe we're supporting students. And so I love like the idea of like the sticker or the flag or even just the word safe
Mhm.
space. Students know what that means. They know what they're looking
Mhm.
for. There's a lot of ways to non-verbally even show students that they're safe to be themselves. I have a friend who teaches in Utah, and
Mhm.
they cannot openly display anything with a rainbow
Right.
in their classroom. So one of the things he does is he takes all of his pens and he lines them up in rainbow color and leaves them on his desk so that the
Mhm.
students know, like, those are the small ways that he displays that he is a safe space for students. And that is just, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah, I love that.
love how teachers are out there just trying to do what they can to create those spaces against the grind of our institutions sometimes, but
Yeah.
there for the students. All right, give us another
Mhm.
strategy.
One is like letting students advocate for themselves. So we as like staff members, obviously, we want to empower them, we want to support them. And if we're already putting in the work to like let students know this is a safe space, eventually a student is going to come to you and say like, hey, I'm Hex, I'm queer. this is who I am. And you want to let those students advocate for themselves. Let them take the lead. Like if a student is coming to you and they're saying, I don't know what to do, you'd be like, okay, well, have you talked to anybody else about this? Like, have you talked to your folks about this? What's your comfortability with that? And sometimes these are things our students haven't talked about, but a lot of times, like, even if you are the first person they're going to, they've already done the calculations of like, this is a safe person to go to. Something to remember with that though, as students are advocating for themselves, is that like confidentiality piece. Because here in Illinois, we do have laws that say that a student's identity is protected. And that's not true in every state. I have friends who are teaching in like Iowa, which just started to kind of roll back some of those laws and some of those protections. So it depends on your area.
And I think even if students are advocating and you don't know what questions to ask, because
Hmm.
maybe it's your first time being in this situation, maybe you're not sure. I think it's also okay just to say, I unconditionally care about you. Right?
100%.
Like, thank you so much for trusting me with this information. Let me
Hmm.
know how I can support you. Sometimes we don't know
100%.
what questions to ask because then we're scared we might get in trouble. Like, I'm going to be
Right.
honest here, we don't know what the law is. We're not
Hmm.
experts in this area. And so I think about like, what's the safest thing that you can say in
Hmm.
that moment for yourself and for the student? I support
Absolutely.
you. Thank you for trusting me with this information. Thank you for coming to me. I'm here
Hmm.
for you. How can I support you? I mean, those are like really easy things
Hmm.
that you can say that are going to tell the student that they're safe with you. And at the same time, you're going to feel like confident that you can say those things. Um,
Hmm.
in your school environment. And I think
Yeah.
then you go and educate yourself, right? Then you go out and you're like, okay, well, what can I
Mhm.
say and how can I support this student because now I have this information.
Yeah. 100%. Being warm is like the most important thing. Because even though like I've been out for years, I still get nervous telling people like, hey, actually, it's any pronouns or hey, actually, like I'm trans, like this is who I am. Like even though I've done it to like hundreds of thousands of
Mm,
people at this point, every single time there's still that anxiety there of like, what's the reaction gonna be? And
mhm.
having like that positivity of being like, hey, I see you, I respect this, I got you. Let's keep going, like roll with the conversation or say, like, even telling the student, like, I don't know what to say other than that's cool and I'm glad you're figuring yourself out. That's a perfect response because the student is going to be feeling that anxiety. And the most important thing in that space is to just reaffirm them and saying, like, hey, I appreciate you telling me this. I appreciate that you're taking the time with yourself to figure out who you are.
Absolutely. All right. Do you have one last strategy for us?
I think the last one is just kind of like a general thing because we've been talking about like this well-intentioned people and like
Hmm.
being well-intentioned is so important. But sometimes that also means you're gonna mess up. I've had people like still dead name me these all years later and use the name that I haven't gone by in like the better part of a decade at this point. And the biggest thing is just like to say sorry and keep going. It's not really about like the accuracy of it, because I don't think in my head like, oh, they messed that up. That means that they hate me. But I do notice if someone is like repetitively using like the same name even after I've corrected them multiple times. But if you're like just making an accident, like especially during like an adjustment period after someone's just come out, like that is totally okay. But you have to take accountability for yourself in that moment. Like you know you're well intentioned. Hopefully that person knows too, but it's still important to be like, "Hey, I'm sorry," before you keep moving on. And
Yes.
you can
Yes.
always like check in later and be like, "Hey, dude, really messed that one up. My bad. Like, what can I do?" But you don't have to like in that moment be like, "Sorry 5,000 times." Or you don't have to just kind of like ignore it entirely. Like it's okay to acknowledge like, "My bad, gang. Like
Yes.
I shouldn't have done that," and keep going with it.
No, I love that too, because I know for myself, like when people identify with pronouns that are different than their pronouns that I may assume that they have, I get anxious, right? I'm like, oh, I'm going
Yeah.
to mess this up. And then if I mess this up and use the wrong pronouns, then they're going to be offended. But I don't want them to be offended because I actually care about them and I want to do better.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is I either try like to use no pronouns, which makes it really hard to talk to them.
Right.
Or I like, I get like really confused or I don't talk. And I think about
Mhm.
We do this a lot as teachers, like well-intentioned, like when a kid has like a really tough name to say,
Mhm.
like you want to say it correctly. You keep like practicing saying it
Yeah.
correctly, but then you get to a point where like I'm not going to call them in class. I'm going to butcher this name, or I'm never going to
Yeah,
say their
you get
last name out
anxious.
loud because you get nervous that you're going to do more harm by
Right.
saying it. But I love that you're like, just try it and
Yeah.
apologize when you mess up. Like, because with anything, you get better with practice,
Mhm.
right? And the more times you use the correct pronoun, you use the correct name, you use the correct terminology, you get better at it, right? And you don't have to think
Exactly.
about it. It becomes more automatic. And if we avoid it altogether, we're never going to get that point where it's going to come natural for us. And so,
Yeah. Part of allyship is learning and being willing to like keep being a part of the process.
mm,
And it's okay to like not use someone's like pronouns 100% of the time. Like if you get it wrong, it is okay. Like that is a part of life. The important thing is showing that person like that you care over time. That this isn't like something for like social points.
mm,
That you are like in this for the person to support them and to support their community. And I think that's fair to say for like allyship in most anything is that the goal is that you are continuously learning and that you're aware of those shortcomings and being able to do those touch bases and keep going.
I love that. And like you got a lot of this like in middle school when students are really
Mhm.
starting to talk about their identities a lot. They're really starting to explore who they are. It's that time of life, right? And that through
Mhm.
middle school and high school and college, that's what those years are all about. But I'm thinking about like from an elementary school perspective where I've lived as a teacher for the last
Mhm.
20 years. How do we support transgender youth, gender nonconforming youth at a young age? And one of the things that I think about my role as an elementary school teacher, I might not be talking about all the different genders or all the different sexualities or all the different LGBTQ terms so early, but I think a really easy entry point is to talk about gender stereotypes. Because I
Mhm.
do feel like that's one of the first ways that kids feel even more othered,
Yep.
right? Like when your teacher said, well, she's not playing with the girls, like what gender stereotyping was that
Mhm.
teacher doing in that moment? Dispelling gender stereotypes from everything from passing out papers. We inadvertently, like if we have a pink paper, we'll inadvertently make sure it goes to a girl versus a boy or
Mhm.
vice versa. When we pass things out, we're thinking about colors in that way. We're thinking about books when we suggest books to students. We're
Mhm.
thinking about, there's a lot of ways that we perpetuate gender bias, gender stereotypes to students. I love reading the book Sparkle Boy to my students every year and talking about gender stereotyping, right? And then we come up with, we call out the gender stereotypes and then we dispel them. So I'm like, give me
Right.
some gender stereotypes: boys blue, girls pink, boys trucks, girls Barbies, whatever it is. And then show me where that rule doesn't apply. Some girl be like, I hate Barbies. I've never played with them, you know? And I love that because then we're like disrupting, right?
Mhm.
And then we say like these are stereotypes. We're going to disrupt these in our class. And I think that's healthy for everybody, but it's
Mhm.
extra affirming for transgender youth because it's showing them that there isn't as rigid of lines, right? I don't
Yeah, and
know if you have
it's
another
so
strategy.
important. 100%, especially from like a intersectional lens. Like there are a lot of cultures where being trans is absolutely normal. Like you can look at the indigenous community here in the United States with being two-spirit, which is the idea, to my understanding, that there are like two spirits inside of you, and that can cause like different genders to pull you in different directions. Their culture is saying, hey, it's totally okay to fight back this gender norms or to like follow their gender norms. And now, this kid gets to school and all of a sudden they're being told that, they're wrong and their self-perception is wrong. So it's important to have exactly like you said, that kind of like lens of these gender norms and how we as teachers can support students to not just dispel the harmful ones, but navigate the ones that remain in place.
And I know like even in fifth grade, like one time, like we were passing out like something from our PTA and it was like the daddy daughter dance and it was on a pink sheet and then it was the
Mhm.
mother son bowling on a blue sheet. And because I have a lot of conversations like this with my fifth graders, one of the students said, well, that's stereotyping because, like, the girl sheet's pink and the boy sheet's blue. And then somebody else said, well, stereotyping that girls would want to go to a dance and boys would want to bowl. And then some of my boys were like, I'd rather dance than bowl. And some of the girls were like, I'd rather bowl than dance.
Dance.
And then somebody said, well, what if they don't have a dad? And somebody else like, what if they don't have a mom? And then it was like this huge conversation. And then somebody's like, this is sexism. And then another one of my students said, it's gender discrimination. And then somebody else like, it's gender stereotyping. And I just loved that they were trying, right? They were trying to understand. Listen, I'm like, so what do we do about it, right? How do we have this conversation with our PTA? How do we say that, maybe different groups would want to do different things, or everyone would want to be included, or how to include people that have different family structures? And so it was just a great conversation. And it shows that a lot of the conversations we're having in class were playing out in the kids' minds. And those conversations had nothing to do with sexuality at a young age. And I think that's what people are scared about. Like, we're talking about sex in elementary school. Nobody's talking about sex
Yeah, nobody
in
wants to do
elementary
that.
school. Nobody wants to do that. I tell people all the time, as a fifth grade, I definitely don't want to do that.
Mhm.
But, we are talking about people's identities all the time. We're talking about your culture and your
Mhm.
identity all throughout your school experience. And so I think these are great conversations to have. And they start in elementary school. They start with normalizing
Mhm.
what gender even is, and what the stereotypes that are associated with genders are.
Yeah, it's really important to give students, if not the language, at least the understanding that what they're experiencing is a part of being human and that it's okay to have the experiences they are, because we want them to know that as time goes on and they do get older, if people have been supportive of them since like elementary, those are the students that I see start come out to me in middle school to be like, this is who I am. I've known this from a young age. I feel good letting you know this. And it's the students who maybe haven't experienced that support or have had these like gender norms reinforced on them time and time again that are the ones that are probably the shyest, that are going to go through life longer, kind of like myself. And they're going to take a while to realize, like, no, this is a part of who I am and it's okay that this is it. So the most important thing, like you said, is just reinforcing that and giving students the tools. And I love that your students are able to like engage in those conversations, because it's not that, oh, they're kids, they can't understand. It's just that they need the tools and the language in order to build that understanding for themselves, which is the
Absolutely.
same scaffolding we do for anything else as teachers.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of teachers have these conversations. They just don't realize that they're gender affirming conversations. I'll give you
Hmm.
one more example. In elementary school, I had a student identified as female, very short hair. And she was constantly being teased about having very short hair. I've had many male students who've had very long hair, and they would also get teased for having very long hair. And I've seen all different teachers in my building tell other children to not tease them, right? That you
Hmm.
can have any kind of hair that you want. Like, it doesn't matter. Girls don't have to have long hair, boys don't have to have short hair. Like, everyone can wear the hair that they're comfortable with. And I've seen tons of teachers send that message to students, right? And
Hmm.
so when even just saying that, you're already a gender affirming teacher, right?
Exactly.
You are making space for students to present their identities in ways that they're comfortable with. And so I think that there's a lot of equity teacher leaders out there. They don't know it maybe because they
Hmm.
never thought of it in that frame, but you are already advocating for your students to be in gender affirming spaces when you say, hey, girls can have short hair and boys can have long hair. Boys can like pink, girls can wear that, boys can wear this.
Yeah.
When you say things like that, you're doing the work.
Hmm.
You already are an ally. So thank you for being an ally.
Yes.
So I think sometimes like elementary school teachers, like, I want to help. I want to be well intentioned. What can I do? Sometimes you're already doing it. You don't even know you're doing it.
Mhm.
Just keep doing it, right? Keep looking for opportunities to do that. All right. So I think that kind of getting into that conversation, I definitely want to make note of the political climate today.
Mhm.
It's sad. I mean, my last blog post I put out is like, lucky to be an educator in Illinois right now. I mean, I
Mhm.
feel so incredibly lucky to have a governor that supports educators, to have a state superintendent and a state school board that supports educators, that
Yeah.
supports diversity, it supports inclusion. Um, but it's a difficult,
Mhm.
difficult environment out there. I mean, we see Denmark, I just saw that they are warning their citizens, like, if you're
Mhm.
transgender, don't come to
Don't
the
come
United
to the United
States.
States.
One of my friends is applying for their citizenship right now, and
Mhm.
she looked at the forms, she said 6 months ago, and there was, male, female,
It's been
and yes,
changed.
and now it's been changed. She's like, "There's no other genders there
Mhm.
to choose." The teachers, the educators that wanna continue to support their students, and maybe living in places where that's difficult, where your job can be on the line, where you
Yeah.
can become the target of bullying. How do we inspire them to
Mhm.
keep supporting their students when they know in their heart what's right? I'm trying to think about, like, how do we support our fellow educators, our fellow colleagues that are in non-supportive spaces? Do you have any advice?
Well, it's really hard, and it's a really important question because it's kind of the only one that matters right now is how do we support our colleagues when we're all going through this, for lack of a better term, collective traumatic experience in education where we're being questioned for things, and now like our friends who their identities are being questioned. And, as someone who didn't realize that I was trans until later in life. I started pretty quickly looking into like name changes, and it costs like quite a chunk of change to get your name changed, even in a supportive state like Illinois. So I haven't yet. And when the laws have started coming through, I've, in a very sad way, was grateful for the fact that I was a broke college student when I wanted to change my name, because I unfortunately have a friend who was recently denied their passport renewal because their name does not match their name on their birth certificate.
Hmm.
And so they are not able to leave the country right now. And we are seeing that there are lots of people in my online communities who are talking about this, that they've been denied passports for their gender marker or for their names not matching. And then even like women who are married, that their last names, they changed their last name when they got married, they're getting denied as well. And it comes back to like this lack of accessibility, and that promoting accessibility for these groups is going to help everyone. The same way that saying, like, hey, it's okay that boys have long hair and girls have short hair helps a trans student, that kind of promotion makes that safe space larger for everyone, even people who are cisgendered. So when we think about supporting our colleagues right now, I think it's the same thing as supporting our students, right? Making sure that they're visible. And there's a quote I saw recently that boils down to do not comply in advance. And it's a kind of summary from a book that's called On Tyranny. Great read if you're a history person, and even if you're not, it talks about authoritarianism and kind of like the politics and how things kind of get this bad or get worse in some cases. And so it examines these things, and it comes down to the most important thing is to show people that you support them and to support your community and to not
Mhm,
let people
mhm,
break your community up. Because the collapse of the community is the collapse of the resistance for things like this.
mm.
And so, even in small ways of like, okay, if you can't put up a pride flag, like before I felt comfortable, putting mine on my laptop, I have little like flower stickers, and they just happen to be in rainbow order. And even colleagues that weren't or aren't out still were like, this is someone that I can talk to. I know this is someone I can be supported by in this moment. And it just is like very much you have to care for your community, whether that community is your students in your classroom or your community in your hallway or your team, or even just your actual community that you're living in, all the way up
Yeah.
to our national one. We just gotta support each other right now.
I think that if everybody was slightly more vocal, who feel more protected, who feel like
Mhm.
they can say these things because they still live in spaces where they are supported, we can show that there's a lot more people that support love than this division. It's like those of us that are a little less scared, being able to say it a little louder, can make the ruckus. If we have the privilege of being cisgender, if we have the privilege of being, heterosexual or any identities more subset, then
Yeah.
you have more privilege to speak out, right? And so
Mhm.
you can protect the people around you that experience more oppression or don't have that privilege. And so I think that it's important that our Christian friends speak against
Mhm.
Islamophobia. It's important that our cisgender
Absolutely.
friends speak against, any transgender,
Mhm.
discrimination. It's important that, white people speak out against racism. Like, it's
Mhm.
important that if we have something that the community sees in a favorable light, that, and we believe that other people should have that same advantage,
Yes.
that we support them in allyship. It's a way to show that you're not just against transgender youth or transgender humans, you're against them and all their
Mhm.
allies. That group's much bigger.
100%.
That
Yeah,
group's
it comes down to that intersectionality of like we can talk about queer rights, but we can't talk about queer history without talking about like Martha P. Johnson and Stonewall. Like it
Mhm.
comes back to that a Black trans person is what started the modern LGBTQ movement. And it comes down to as like a queer person, it is not just like my duty, but like I have to. Like that is my responsibility when I'm speaking for queer rights to also speak for the rights of people of color because we're all woven together. And when it comes to times like this where there's multiple communities being attacked, it's really easy for people to go into silos and be like, well, my identity is attacked. That's my problem. I have to defeat that.
Mhm.
But if we're all working together and reaching across those lines and saying, no, you can't pick on all of us, we're all working together, that's going to be more supportive. And when I've experienced like transphobia in my community actively, like even just a couple weeks ago, right? That when there are people who are using their privilege to speak up, whether it's my friends who are cis or my friends who pass as cis, they're being listened to more
Mhm.
because they're seen as more reputable or they're seen as having that more privilege in society, the same way that a white person is going to probably be trusted more. That doesn't make it right, but it does give them the power to use in the way they choose to. And if you're choosing to be silent, you're choosing to be complacent in what's happening. And I think we're at a time, especially in education, where if you have the ability to speak up and protect your colleagues and protect your students, that's what we should be doing as educators.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that you brought up Stonewall because we haven't talked about the inclusive curriculum law that's now been in effect for
Mhm.
I think 4 years or something.
Yeah, quite some
Um,
time. Yeah,
it's
it
been
passed during
some
COVID.
time. Yes, I know. I was very familiar with the law, and that law basically says we have to teach the history
Mhm.
and contributions of the LGBT community throughout our students' school experience. And the reason for that is so that we build empathy and love
Mhm.
for all people, right? When we don't talk about groups of people, when identities are missing from our curriculum,
We're still sending a message.
and that's when we're also basically further othering people and we're
Mhm.
breeding ignorance and breeding hate, right? But when everybody can be part of the fabric of the story, the fabric of history, then from a young age, we're showing inclusivity, we're showing love, we're showing that it takes every identity and to contribute to our community. Our community got so great because of the wonderful, beautiful diversity in our community, and that means
Exactly, yeah.
including the history and contributions of the LGBTQ community. I know the Teach Act passed, teaching the equitable Asian
Mhm.
American community history, SB 564, which was teaching the history and contributions of all minoritized faiths passed. I mean, these were like three right in a row
Mhm.
that were pivotal in addressing discrimination, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, Asian hate,
Mhm.
homophobia, transphobia. This was to dispel those things, right? By
Mhm.
talking about humanizing,
Yeah.
right? And celebrating and talking about the contributions of many communities that have made to our great country that we live in. If you don't know about the inclusive curriculum law or any of the laws that I just mentioned, please go out
Mhm.
and educate yourself on that. All right, we got to get to our last question. I ask this one every time, but I got to know yours. If you could create like a student success playlist, a song, a quote, or story that inspires you to teach, to keep on teaching, what would be on it?
Oh, there's just so much. I think I'm like very thankful to be in the area I am because Freeport is such like a diverse group of students. I think like the big thing that I really keep coming back to as like a quote is we just got a new dean this year. At one point, I was talking to him about some of our students, and I was like, I just don't know what to do, but I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing, and we're gonna figure it out together. And he just looked at me and he kind of stopped and he was like, "You really don't give up on kids, do you?" And I was like, no, why would I? Like, why should anyone? So when we're living in times like these where there's so much going on at once, like someone has to fight tooth and nail. If I can be the right guy for at least one student, I've made a difference in my little corner, and that's all I've ever wanted to do. And I think that's the important thing for teachers right now is to like find your niche and to at least do like one thing because that still means that you're making progress. And we just gotta keep fighting.
I absolutely love that. Let me tell you, you may have only been a teacher for what, 2 years?
This is my second year, yeah.
You are an early career teacher, but you are a teacher leader. I can see how you lead with so much heart. And there's no doubt that you're an equity focused teacher leader because you are out there advocating for your students. You're out there being a safe space, elevating voice, advocating on so many levels. And most importantly, you are an equity teacher leader because you don't give up on kids. And I'm was so privileged to have you today on this podcast. I've learned so much from you, and this has been just so great.
Thank you so much.
Put the work in, yeah.